So this is a mitten, as you can see. That bit is not the mystery. This is from the British Arctic expedition, which went up north 1875 to 76. It's really one of the last big state-sponsored Arctic expeditions of the Victorian period that gets sent north. So in the 1840s, there's an expedition that is catastrophic, really, a huge loss of life. And so the appetite for polar exploration into the Arctic very much wanes. But in the 1870s, there's a push to get to the North Pole. And this is the expedition. I guess that clothing is such an important part of Arctic exploration and about the kind of work that you do today. I wonder if could you tell me a little bit about kind of how important it is to keep warm?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's keeping warm is vital to life. The big part is obviously your core temperature, so you want to keep that warm. If you look at it like an engine, you need to keep the engine stoked, you need to eat and drink well, and then to aid everything, you need to keep your extremities covered, and that avoids the possibilities of getting frostbite, for instance.
Yeah.
So yeah, something like mittens, absolutely brilliant because you can sort of wiggle your fingers and keep the circulation going. Gloves are a wee bit more restrictive, so you cut the circulation off a wee bit quicker.
And I guess because something like this, I mean, one of the things that I sort of think about in relation to it is the kind of ways in which British exploration, to some extent, although not a huge extent, drew on the kind of knowledge of indigenous communities. Because obviously for Inuit, keeping yourself warm and having the skill to make your own clothing from the animals that are around you is really, really important. What kind of things do you use today then in terms of kind of materials and that kind of thing to keep yourself warm?
Yeah, so in today's sort of polar world, it's a lot more synthetic, a lot of materials, but they're doing the same sort of purpose. So you're essentially trying to keep the wind out as much as possible.
Yeah.
You're trying to create a sort of insulating air layer above them, like the sort of fur would do. And ultimately just allow them to be comfortable to work in. So again, not too tight, you don't want cuffs that are too elasticated. In addition to this, it's quite good to have the layering system so that you can take off and add on layers as is required. Because the last thing you want to do is to have one big coat. If you take it off and you've got nothing underneath, it's hot or cold, there's nothing in between.
Yeah, generally cold, I expect. And one of the things I think when Inuit talked about some of the historic expeditions, they were really shocked that the British didn't have anything to keep the wind out. It's interesting that you talk about that because when Inuit clothing usually has a hood, and the British, particularly in the 19th century, you're kind of wearing naval uniform or you're wearing lots of wool and the absolutely kind of not ideal things. I mean, the best things that people had, but not the kind of things that local people were used to wearing and thought were the best things.
From my limited experience of history and reading the history books, it did seem that oftentimes there was, I don't want to say an arrogance, but just an assumption that the Navy way was the right way, but actually, you know, the local people who survive in those climates 100% and know the best way to do things.
Yeah, absolutely.